Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening, and thank you, everybody that's zooming in this evening as well. I'm Jim. I'm with the Master Gardener Association in Coconino County. I've been a Master Gardener here since 1991, and I've been teaching classes for the Master Gardener program since 1992. So we intend to have some fun tonight. And again, I appreciate everybody coming out. How many of you have had some experience already doing some vegetable gardening? Quite a few of you. Very, very good. How many have had experience here in Flagstaff doing that? About half. And about how many have had experience someplace else doing that? Quite a few too. How many have done both? Anybody? Have you noticed any differences between gardening here and gardening someplace else?
Here versus Phoenix, certainly a later start because of the weather.
Right.
I live in the neighborhood in the Banana Belt, so certainly much more easy to balance soil.
Right.
Much more fertile here.
Well, good. Well, I think most of you who have gardened elsewhere, wherever it may be, will find that things are much different here in Flagstaff than they are in most every place else in the country. I grew up in the Midwest and in a gardening family, been gardening since I was a little kid. So I know the differences and I know what we're dealing with. So this evening, what we're going to do is talk about the differences between growing things here, the things that you're dealing with, how to deal with them, and how to be successful dealing with them. And as the rest of the classes progress, we'll all be emphasizing that same theme, how to be successful growing here in Northern Arizona, and particularly specifically at high elevation in Flagstaff area. So tonight we're going to talk mainly about planning and things that you have to do ahead of time to have your garden be a success. Because our goal is for you not to just have a mediocre garden, but to have a fantastic garden. And by the time you're through with all of the classes, I think you'll be able to do that. So let's move on. Why would you want to grow your own vegetables in the first place? Why bother? You know, there's going to be problems. It might be kind of difficult here, but why would you want to do it? You tell me. Why? What are some good reasons?
Save money.
You might be able to save money in the long run. In the long run, in the long run, maybe not in the short run. What else? There's some very, very good reasons.
I like a challenge.
You like a challenge. That's always a good one. What else?
They taste better.
Exactly. Anything that you grow yourself is going to taste much better than what you buy in the store. But there are just a lot of good reasons. Again, the quality of the produce, what you grow on your own is going to be much better. Also, you know what's gone into those plants. You know if they've been treated, you know if they're organic, even if they're labeled organic, you still don't know really what happened to them. If you're doing your own, you know exactly what happened to them. Believe it or not, it's good exercise. And as it says there, 45 minutes of gardening has the same benefit as 30 minutes of aerobic exercise. So it's good for you to be out there physically and mentally as well. It can be relaxing and therapeutic, and there are whole books on gardening for mental health. There are programs in horticultural therapy where gardening is used for actual therapeutic purposes. You're in good company. More people participate in gardening than any other outdoor activity in the United States. So you're part of a big group of people if you're doing it. But things are going to be a little bit different here than they are in many parts of the country. So we want to talk for a little bit on what the differences are and how we're going to deal with those differences. So what are your thoughts? What things are going to be different here that you're going to be dealing with? And some of them are very obvious and some of them aren't. Pardon me?
The season.
The season is very short. Very short season.
That's what I was
Going to say the same thing, but what else?
Climate.
Climate, and specifically what with the climate?
This is the high desert, so it's very dry.
It's very dry. How about wind? Windy. These are things you're going to be dealing with. How about soil? Soil is not going to be very good here. for vegetable gardening. So there are a lot of reasons. And there are other reasons too, and we'll just talk about some more of them. So we have a short growing season here. So what's the growing season? It's about 103 days officially in Flagstaff. That gives you the dates of what the growing season is. But what's the definition of growing season to begin with? What are we talking about? What does it mean? Exactly. It's the date from the very last frost in the spring until the very first frost in the fall. And that's what really throws people off here, because we'll have beautiful weather in April with no frost, no freezing. Same thing happens in May, but we might have a snowstorm in June. We might have 80 degrees one day and then it freezes the next day. So it's very, very unpredictable, clear up until the middle of June. And that's what throws people off more than anything else. People will be out there trying to plant their gardens in April or May, and then the whole thing freezes out, and then they'll start over and the whole thing freezes out again. So timing is one of the things we're going to be talking about today too.
But isn't the
And I'll
UV
get
also
more
a
specific
problem?
on that in just a little bit. But just be aware that officially
Yes, you
that's
don't hear
what
us
the growing
either.
season is. And that's longer than when it used to be. When I was first started gardening here almost 50 years ago, our official growing season was 90 days. And the old timers here called it was 90 days, give or take 90 days, because you just never knew. Because I think frost has been reported in Flagstaff historically every month of the year except August. August is the only one where there's never been a frost. My house out in Dillon Park, I had a frost on 4th of July, more than once. In some parts of town like Baderville and out that way, you're colder yet. So you just need to be aware of that and just be ready to deal with that. And we'll talk about that. So regarding that, we have late spring frost, early fall frost. And we already talked about it's a dry climate, because even though we're in a pine forest, it's still an arid climate as well. And when's the driest time of the year? The driest months typically are May and June. And what are you going to be doing with your garden in May and June? You're going to be planting it. So that gives you a challenge right there, that you're going to be planting during the driest time of the year. And that makes it more difficult. It's also windy. And the same thing is, it's the same windiest time of the year too. Typically May and June are also the windiest months, but I said I lived in Dillon Park for many years and it was windy all the time pretty much out there. And before that I lived in Winslow, which is even windier yet. So yeah, you're going to have to deal with wind. And some of the vegetable plants don't like wind. So you need to know that and be aware of which ones don't like it and deal with them accordingly. What about soil? That slide is not an exaggeration on what your soil might look like here. Typically, our native soils are very poor and very lacking in nutrients, which is fine for growing the native plants that are here because they're adapted to that. However, when you're growing a vegetable garden, you're not, for the most part, growing native plants. They're not acclimated to our soil, so you're going to have to do something with the soil to make your plants happy. I'm going to talk at great length about that in just a little while on things that you need to be doing. We have very, very cool summer nights, and that's unusual. I grew up in Ohio, in Northern Ohio, and there isn't much difference from daytime temperature to nighttime temperature. There's only about 10 degrees difference. For instance, if it gets up to 80 during the day, it only goes down to 70 at night. As opposed to here, it gets up to 80 during the day and goes down to 40 at night, possibly, or sometimes even colder than that. So that's tough on a lot of the plants. A lot of our vegetable plants are not acclimated to that. So that's just another thing that you're going to be dealing with. We also have high sun intensity because we're at high elevation. Some of the plants can sunburn if they're kind of in the wrong microclimate in your garden. So you're dealing with sunburn, particularly with tomato plants and some other things. Just another factor that you need to be thinking about. And as I said, because of all of these things, with the dryness, the sun intensity, believe it or not, it can be as much as 25 degrees difference in temperature from a place in the sun and a place in the shade at the same time. And what I mean by that, if this is sun right here, it might be 75 degrees while it's 50 degrees in the shade over there at the same time. So we're going to take advantage of that though in our garden, because as we will see, not all vegetables want the same conditions. Some of them like to be cool. Some of them like to be warm. And because of all of the factors we're dealing with, we want to put them in the appropriate microclimate in our garden. So we'll talk more about that also in more detail in just a little bit. So don't feel like this is getting overwhelming, because you can deal with all of this. You just need to be aware of what you're dealing with so that you can deal with it appropriately. Again, as I mentioned before, we have large swings between the daytime high and the nighttime low. It kind of goes around like that, up and down and up and down and up and down, usually around 40 degrees difference most of the time. Unless during the monsoons, when we have very high humidity, then that difference is not quite as much. But that's about the only time of the year that it doesn't fluctuate as much. And because of where we're located at a southern latitude, we have fairly short day length in the summer. We're located right about here on the line between intermediate daylight and short daylight during the summer. So what that means is areas of the country that have similar temperatures to ours in the summertime are way up here. But what do they have that we don't? They have more daylight. So what does that mean? What are the plants going to be doing during the daylight hours? That's when they're going to be growing, because that's when they're photosynthesizing. So they can grow more and faster in the same amount of time than they do here. If anybody's ever been way in the far north or in Alaska up there, they can grow gigantic vegetables during the summer in a short period of time just because the sun's out the whole time. So we don't have that advantage here. We have the opposite thing. We have shorter daylight. So now we're really excited, and we're going to get a vegetable garden going. And we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of factors are important in selecting a site for your garden. And keep in mind, you don't have to have your garden all in one place. You don't have to have like one place where you're planting your whole thing. You can put different things or different beds all around the property that you're dealing with. That's great. And that's really nice if you can do that. If you have very small space that you're dealing with, you can still grow a vegetable garden. You may not even have any property at all. You may be in an apartment and you have a balcony or decks or something like that. You can still grow a vegetable garden, but you need to know how to do that and how to take advantage of what space that you have. But if you have some room, what are the kind of things you need to think about? You tell me, what do you think? Just as far as location, what do you need to take into account? Yes?
Possibly the amount of shade.
Exactly, the amount of shade, the amount of sun, the exposure, what
Wind.
the wind, if you
Direction.
have wind breaks, excellent. That's all kind of things. Typically things get more sun on the south side of your house or the south side of buildings than on the north side. Southeast and south exposures are generally the best for a vegetable garden. A slight slope is even better than flat for a vegetable garden because it tends to drain cold air off of it. So these are just some things you need to consider, and it's great that you're thinking along those lines. So think about convenience too, because generally, if you're kind of making this thing and not in a convenient location, it's unlikely that you're going to do much with it. So make it as convenient as you can so that you actually do it. So you actually get out and do what you need to do. Again, as I mentioned, think about exposure. In the south to a southeast slope is what's ideal in our climate because it gets more sun exposure and it tends to be warmer. And because of our cooler weather in the summer, we're most of the time trying to get things warmer for the most part, but not for everything, but for most things. There's just a diagram of a south-facing garden, and it just has to do with where the sun is throughout the day.
I like it.
Again, for the most part, for a vegetable garden here, as much sun as you can. And depending on the property that you're growing your garden on, you may have a lot of big pine trees on there, that's throwing off a lot of shade. So you may be limited in your options, but try to do the best that you can. And you can improve the microclimates that you have. You can make warmer ones cooler and you can make cooler ones warmer. And we'll talk later a little bit about how to do that. Make it so your water source is convenient. You are going to have to water things, at least for part of the year. And if we're lucky and get a really good monsoon, that you do reach a point, July and August sometimes, where you don't have to water too much. But it's particularly during the early months of your garden experience in April, May, June, you are going to have to water things because, as we said, it's going to be dry, it's going to be windy. So make sure you have a water source available, and that's going to be your biggest expense also. Water is getting much more precious, it's getting much more expensive, so you want to use your water wisely. So I'd like you to think about the concept of planning your garden ahead of time and doing it formally, not just particularly just in your head, like, well, I want to go over this, I want to go over that. Think the whole thing out ahead of time, because remember, you're dealing with a compact, short season. And if you screw something up the first time, you may not have time to start over. You don't have the luxury of a very long season where you can do things over and over again. So you really need to get it right the first time. And one of the best things you can do is to make out a plan on paper, on computer, however you want to do it. But think about planning it formally. It also makes for a good record that you can refer to the following year and the year and year and year going onward. What did I do? What did I grow? Where did I put it? What did well, what didn't do well? You might think you remember all this stuff from year to year, but chances are you won't entirely. This is just an example of a garden planning app. There are many of them available. You can download onto a computer or onto your phone. The best one that I've come across is one called Seed Time, SEEDTIME. It's an outstanding application for a vegetable garden. It'll do a lot of things for you. It'll make a formal map that's easy to plug things into. You can put in dimensions. You can put in exactly what you grew, when you did it, how you did it, where you put it. And it'll automatically keep a journal for you on all of this stuff. That's very easy to refer. So you might want to check that out. Another one that's good is called Planter, PLANTER. That's another one that you might want to check out. And for people that are technologically proficient, you might find that to be an interesting exercise to go about doing it in that manner. But it doesn't matter how you do it, but it's really helpful if you do it. You can just keep, a notebook or something like that. I did that for many years. Now I do it on computer, but again, just write down dates you planted, what you planted. Be sure to put the varieties that you planted so you can keep track of what varieties did nicely for you and what varieties did not do nicely for you. So just, things that just keep track of it. And it makes a good record to refer to the following year. So again, there's some things to include in the journal that you're keeping, and it's just common sense, and especially, write in there what did well and what didn't, and what things you might want to consider for doing the next year, because it's all going to be important. So a little more detail on things that you need to think about when you're planning, some things to go into your planning and your design. Obviously, figure out what you want to grow. And for the most part, if you're beginning, grow something that you like to eat so that you're going to make sure you harvest what you grow. So figure out what you want to grow in the first place. And figure out what kind of soil preparation you want to do. And yes, you will be required to do some soil preparation unless you're fortunate and are going to start a garden or work in a garden that's been worked for many years already. You're going to have to do something, and I'll talk in much detail in a little bit on what you need to think about doing. But yes, you're going to have to do soil preparation, and you need to know when you want to do that soil preparation at an appropriate time. What kind of arrangements do you want to use? I mean, there's all different kinds of ways you can arrange your garden. Does anybody know what this is called? This is a specific method that has a name. Yes. Square foot gardening, exactly. And you can get whole books and everything on the concept of square foot gardening. And basically, you grow in each one of those compartments a separate vegetable, and you rotate them from year to year. You can do more than one planting in one compartment from one year to another. It works very, very well if you have a very small space to work with. So that's something to consider. That's really rather interesting. You can grow things, of course, in traditional rows. That's what's been done for many, many years. That's what most farming practices are done when things are grown in large quantities, but you don't have to do it that way. That's just one thing you can do. You can do double rows. That's where you have 2 rows close together, and then a space, and then another 2 rows close together. I had quite a large garden when I was out in the Joni Park area, and that's the method I used. I put a soaker hose right down the center of those double rows, so I could get 2 rows off of one, being watered off of one soaker hose. That was very successful for me, and I was growing in a large space, and that worked really well. So no, that's just another thing to consider. You can grow in wide rows, and that's just making your double rows more than 2, but a whole lot wider. And if you look carefully at that, you'll see that they have some kind of drip irrigation or soaker hoses going down in between those rows as well. But that's just a bigger volume in a certain area, and then a walkway, and a bigger volume and a walkway. That tends to work really good in a wet, humid climate that gets a lot of rain. Might not be quite as successful for you here in our area, but it's something to consider. Raised beds. Has anybody used raised beds or have grown things? What's been your experience with raised beds? You like them? They're good. Like yours too? Yeah. My whole garden now is in raised beds, and I really love it. What would be some reasons for doing that? What are some advantages to that? What are they? Your back? Yeah, you don't have to bend over. You don't have to bend over quite as far. Any other reasons you can think of why those might have an advantage? It's easier to amend the soil, exactly. Anything else you can think of? There are really good reasons to do it. It looks nice too, if you look at it, and it keeps things well defined, and it's easy to get around in a garden that has raised beds. So there are just some reasons to do it. It's easier to improve and maintain the soil. Also, one big advantage here is they tend to be warmer, and they warm up faster in the spring because they're kind of up high, so they get a little more sun. So the soil that's in the raised bed warms up faster than it does just at ground level. They tend to have better drainage. As I said, they provide good definition to your garden, and it's better access for gardeners with disabilities. I don't think you have disabilities, but a raised bed doesn't have to be a foot high. Raised beds can be this high. And in care facilities, there are a lot of raised beds that are at wheelchair level for people that are handicaps and with limited mobility can still do gardening in these very high raised beds. They're really nice if anybody has ever seen those in place. And then you don't have to bend over at all if you've got one like that. Plus, in those really tall ones, you can create really deep soil in there as well, which is really nice. Particularly if you live in country club or some of the areas that are very, very rocky, it's really difficult to get soil deep enough for your garden. And that kind of area is another place where raised beds really work really, really well. You can grow things in hills, and that's just like mounds of things. Commercially, potatoes are generally grown in hills. Other crops are sometimes grown in hills as well. Think about using vertical space for your gardening. You can add a lot of gardening space to your garden, particularly if you're in a small area, by going up. A lot of things will grow on trellises. A lot of things will grow on fences. Take advantage of that. And you can use that by creating some vertical height and growing things on that by providing some shade for some other plants that may want some shade and may want to be cooler. That's one easy way that you can do it. So think about it. I mean, pumpkins, melons, beans, all kinds of stuff will grow up trellises. Cucumbers do really well on trellises. Lots of things do. Okay, now we got our rows or wide rows or raised beds or whatever we're doing. There is a way to line them up if you have the choice. A north-south alignment where the long axis of your rows or bed is on a north-south line. Things will grow better than if the thing is lined up east-west. North-south is better, and it has to do with the way the sun moves over it during the day and where shade is being created. Interestingly enough, on a row of, say, a whole row of lettuce, if you have it on an east-west alignment, instead of being like the same height as you go down the row, they tend to be like this, where one end of the row is going to be tall and the other end of the row is going to be short, and it just has to do with the amount of sunlight. You may not have a choice. You may not have that option depending on what kind of property or space that you're dealing with. But if you have the choice, try to line them up north and south. You'll have better success if you do that. Think about what the presence of structures and trees is going to have on your garden. I mean, for instance, in that garden, it's got shelter on 3 sides. Now, if this open area is facing south, that would be wonderful because that'll give you maximum exposure. But you know, the fences, the building, the tree, all of that is going to provide shade at some point during the day. That may or may not be a good thing, depending on what you're trying to grow. And you need to think about what you're growing and where you're going to put it in there, where it's either going to want sun or it's going to want shade. But also think about those structures are also going to absorb heat during the day and radiate heat back at night. That can be an advantage for you as well to keep your garden warmer at night. So that's another weird thing that you need to think about as well. Lots of things to think about. So what about watering? As I said, water is a precious commodity. It's getting even more so all of the time. It's going to be your biggest expense. So there are efficient ways to water. There are inefficient ways to water. The one on the right is a drip system, efficient, sprinkler, not efficient. Okay. So you don't want to waste any of the water that you're going to be using. So drip irrigation is very, very efficient. There's no waste whatever. And what drip irrigation is, you have like a tubing or T-tape, it's called, and you punch holes where you're going to have plants, or you run a little spaghetti tube out of there to the plants, and you can control exactly where that water is going to go. None of it's going to be wasted. None of it's going to evaporate. It's all going to be used by your plants. Soaker hoses also work extraordinarily well, and I used those for many years out in the Donny Park area. The difference between the soaker hose and drip irrigation is a soaker hose drips water, weeps water the entire length of it. So for row type crops, that works really well. Again, I did double rows with one soaker hose in the middle. That worked fantastic for me. They use very little water again. And I actually put the soaker hoses underground rather than leave them on top of the ground like what that showed. I dug a shallow trench and then planted right over top of it. And that worked really well too. Of course, you can do it the traditional Southern Arizona irrigation method. That does work very well, but you lose a lot of water to evaporation, and you use a whole lot of water doing that as well. Sprinklers are the worst thing you can do. Those will work on a lawn, but that's about it. You lose water to the wind and you lose water to evaporation. I would not recommend it for a vegetable garden. Or if you've got lots of time, you can efficiently water by hand, but you're going to be talking about hours and hours of your time in order to do that. So it's fine if you want to do that. And if you've got time, that's great. It's really therapeutic to do that. It's kind of fun, but it'll take a lot of time. So what about mulch? Should we be using mulches here? Obviously, yes. Again, another way we're going to help conserve water. All of the mulches conserve water, but there are 2 different classifications of mulches, and they work opposite of each other as far as controlling or maintaining soil temperature. There are organic mulches and there are inorganic mulches. What are some examples of organic mulches that you can think of? Straw, like you see right there. Straw is an organic mulch. What are other ones? One of them's obvious is pine needles that you have all over the place. Leaves, basically an organic mulch is something that's recently been alive, as opposed to inorganic mulches. What would be some examples of inorganic mulches?
Cardboard boxes.
Cardboard boxes, yeah, maybe. But I'm thinking more of cinders, rocks, gravel, and plastics.
Yes.
Okay, so one of them cools the soil, one of them heats the soil. Which classification does which? Which one cools the soil, organic or inorganic? Organic cools the soil and cools the ambient air temperature right at soil level. Inorganic mulches heat the soil and heat the ambient air temperature at soil level. So why is that important to know? It's important because you want to use them appropriately. You want to use organic mulches around the vegetables that want to stay cooler, and you want to use inorganic mulches around the plants that you want to heat up. And if you use them backwards, it can kill your garden, or your garden's not going to work well if you're not using them properly. Organic mulches, as I said, tend to cool the soil. However, sometimes they can cool the soil so much that it's really recommended for Flagstaff, you don't put them on there until at least no earlier than the middle of June or late June. Otherwise, it might keep your soil too cold because the soil hasn't warmed up enough yet for things to germinate properly. So don't put the organic mulches on to more around late June, 1st July, somewhere around there. You can use the inorganic mulches, though, to heat the soil up ahead of time. You can use plastics and put them on there for a couple of weeks before you want to plant something. It'll actually heat the soil up to the point where your seeds will germinate faster, but you may not want to leave it on there if you're growing a lettuce or a cool weather vegetable like that. And you have to be careful. Which kind of plastic heats things the most? Think of black plastic, clear plastic, red plastic, green plastic, and blue plastic. All of those are available. Not black, although that's what you would think. It's clear. Clear plastic actually heats the soil too much. If you put with arsenic intensity, it's recommended you don't ever use clear plastic for anything. Clear plastic is used by the Forest Service over piles of trees that they've cut down that are infested with bark beetles. They put that over there because it heats it and cooks those bark beetles and kills them. It'll also kill everything in your soil that you don't want to be killed, like the earthworms and the beneficial insects and the beneficial bacteria and all that. But plastics are okay to use, but only for a brief period if you want to warm your soil up a little bit. And then after that, you can put them around your warm weather vegetables that want to have some extra heat. Otherwise, other than that, use the organic mulches. Everybody understand that? Yes, sir.
Can you explain a little more about using pine needles as mulch?
You can use
I have
pine.
a lot with how many mature ponderosa, continuous shedding of leaves
Right.
and all.
You can use pine needles as a mulch. You cannot use them as a soil amendment. Meaning you don't want to work them into your soil because they break down so slowly. They just don't release the nutrients, or they won't help acidify your soil fast enough, but they work great as a mulch. Now you can make compost out of pine needles, and one of your classes, I think it's class number 3, that's going to be talking about compost. Frank Branham will be teaching that, and he's a pro at composting pine needles, and I'm sure he'll talk about that and tell you how you can do that. So, but as a mulch, they work really well. Did that answer your question?
Well, do you need to clear the pine needles to do the initial planting?
To do your initial planting, you would need to clear the pine needles too, but then you can put some back on. I mean, you don't want them a foot thick like they might be in your yard. But think about it, if you just go out in the forest, what's on the forest floor? Pine needles. So they're there for a reason. They're doing some good. Okay, so now you need to figure out, where you're gonna put what. Think about what's gonna get tall, what's gonna stay short, what needs to be in the sun, what needs to be in the shade. And you can use tall plants to shade short plants. That's one way you can create some shade if you need to create some shade. When I was in Donny Park, I had no shade whatsoever. And it was wide open, everything wide open to the sun, wide open to the wind. So I used tall plants like corn or things on trellises like peas and pole beans to create some shade for things that I wanted to be shady. So that's one way you can think about doing that. So that brings us to the topic we've already touched on, which is microclimates in your garden. There are going to be natural microclimates in there. There are going to be, and for that, you just have to observe what are the warmer areas, what are the cooler areas. Take advantage of that. Put the warm stuff where they in the warm areas, cool things that want to be cool. In the cool areas, and I'll go into a little more detail into which vegetables are which and what you can do with the microclimates in just a few minutes. So again, it has to do with warm weather vegetables and cool weather vegetables. They don't like the same conditions. So you need to know which are which and put them in the right place. It makes a huge difference here in how they are going to do. So you need to figure out how much space is needed for specific plants. Some of them are going to need a lot of room, some of them not very much room. There's a nice little chart on spacing that just tells you, what's gonna, just kind of how far apart stuff is gonna take. So you need to take that into account, particularly if you're dealing with a small space.
Will we get these slides?
Ask Rusty, I don't know, ask Rusty, I don't know.
I can get them to you.
It's fine with me.
Okay, yeah, I definitely can send them out.
It's impossible to read all this to remember it. And you can't write fast enough to write all this stuff down. But just taking it, familiarize yourself with how much space things are going to take up, because that's going to be important as the season moves along. What about crop rotation? There's some good reasons to do that. Mainly it has to do with depleting the nutrients in your soil and with controlling insects and diseases, because some diseases that some plants are susceptible to can stay in the ground for up to 4 years. So you may not want to plant the same plant in the same spot year after year. This just shows one rotation schedule that tends to work very well, but you can do whatever you want. Again, if you have a really small space, you may not even have the option to do that. And if you don't have the option to do that, the trick would be to just make sure you are replenishing your soil very, very thoroughly from 1 year to the next. It's just, a concept to think about. What about companion planting? That can get very, very complicated. And what that concept is that some vegetables like to grow close to other ones. Some vegetables don't like other vegetables and they get angry with each other and don't grow well when they're together. I have not really used this very much. But I think there is something to it. But if you get heavily into this, it's really going to complicate things a whole lot. I think the only one I've ever really used is tomatoes and basil plants around tomatoes. They do seem to be really good companions. And things that are good companions, the theory is they kind of feed off of each other. They're just good as coexisting with each other. What about wind protection? If you live in a very, very windy place, you really need to provide some wind protection somehow for your garden, however you might want to go about doing that. There's many, many ways you can do that. You can plant a windbreak, you can put up a fence, put up cement blocks as kind of a temporary barrier, just pretty much. You can get really, really elaborate, like this place on the left. That's really fancy windbreak if you want to go all out. But you can do simple things like this, and like a raised bed, they just put up some plastic barriers on a couple of sides just to help break the wind. And that kind of thing will also heat up that soil a little bit as well and keep it a little bit warmer at night. So that's something to think about as well. Or you can use season extenders as various kinds, not just for wind protection, but for changing the temperatures in your garden, particularly during planting time. The one on the left is just a really easy thing that I use all the time still. That's just like a water jug or a milk jug, and you cut out the bottom and
Yes.
stick it in there. Have you done that? Did it work? No? But it works really well. And then you stick a plant in there. You can't see the plant, but there's a plant in there. I did discover, however, that if you're doing this, you need to mound that soil up to about that level, at least halfway up, not like it shows here, but at least halfway up. Number one, it keeps it from blowing away. And number two, I found that it actually gets too hot in there, even like in March and April, it's too hot. It just cooks them. So, but if you mound the soil up like to this level, it keeps it at a really nice even temperature. It kind of creates a little mini greenhouse. During the day, the caps need to be off of there or you're going to suffocate the plants. You can leave it off at night if it's not terribly cold, but if you're getting a deep freeze and you've got plants growing under there, then I would put the caps back on just at night, just to help keep them. Who can tell me what this is over here? Wall of water, yes. Those are like a little mini greenhouse. Those are wonderful. I used those for many, many years. They're like this thing that's a bunch of cylinders and you put water in those cylinders. So it creates a little mini greenhouse effect. Works really well, particularly with tomato plants. That's what they use for the most, but you can put like squash plants, pumpkin plants, melons, anything in there that you want to keep warmer during the early part of the season. You can leave it on there the whole time. I took mine off by the 1st of July because they just tended to get in the way and kind of inhibited the growth a little bit at that point. But those are available pretty much anywhere and they work really, really well. And once you take them off and dump all that water off, I just didn't dump it out. I kept all that water and used it to water all of the plants until all of that water was gone too. Or you can get more elaborate type season extenders like a cold frame, and that's what's on the left, or just a floating row or they're all different things you can do, like on the right. That'll just give you a longer season. And Jackie Alston is teaching on vegetable varieties next week. She's very good at using season extenders, and she may talk in more detail about season extenders because she has done that very elaborately for a number of years. So you might ask her about that if she doesn't get into it. Think about timing for activities. Again, that little resource right there, if you haven't seen it, the Flagstaff Planting Guide, a number of us put that together. I think the announcement about 20 years ago that we put that together. It's available at the local nurseries and in some of the bookstores. It's laminated so you can take it out to the garden without ruining it. And it has a whole wealth of information on there about timing, when to plant stuff, what to plant stuff, what does well, what doesn't. It has a garden calendar on there for most of the months of the year. So it's a double-sided thing. It's excellent, excellent resource. But the whole concept here is timing. Learn how to time what you're doing in your garden as well. Use appropriate varieties. And this is a matter of common sense. Learn varieties. If we have a 103-day growing season, don't buy a package of corn seeds. It says on there it needs 180 days. Obviously, that's not going to work. So, read seed packets, read labels on plants, learn what it means. Regarding that, interested, just as an aside, if something says, for example, 60 days, you got a packet of seeds and it says 60 days. What does that mean? It depends. That's a trick question because it depends. If it's something that you're planting the seeds directly in the ground and that's where the crop is going to grow and then you harvest it, say, for example, lettuce or radishes, you're just going to plant the seeds in the ground. You're not going to start them ahead of time and transplant them. Let's say radishes, for example, and it says 30 days. That means it's 30 days from the time you put the seed in the ground till you harvest the first mature radish that's ready to pick. What about if it's a packet of tomato seeds or pepper seeds or eggplant seeds that says 50 days or 60 days? What does that mean? Does it mean the same thing? No. doesn't mean the same thing at all. What that means is that's a plant that you're not going to put that seed directly in the ground. You're going to start it ahead of time, create a plant that you're going to transplant out into the garden. The ideal size for all transplants for vegetables is 6 inches, okay, 6 inches tall. You have to figure out, and it may or may not say on the seed packet, how long it's going to take for that, from when you plant that seed till you have a 6-inch plant. And for tomatoes plants, that's generally 6 weeks. For pepper plants, it's generally 8 weeks. So what that means is if it says 60 days, it's 60 days from when you put a 6-inch plant out in your garden until you get the first ripe tomato or ripe pepper or whatever. That throws people off too, because sometimes they'll just plant seeds of those kind of plants and wonder why they didn't get anything. Because there's a difference. So again, pay attention to what's on seed packets, pay attention to what's on plant labels if you're buying plants. So now's the time to go into a little more detail on the 4 things. And I've already touched on the 4 basic principles of being successful in growing a garden in the Flagstaff area or in other areas around here that are high elevation, like Grand Canyon, some areas on Hopi Reservation, other places that are high elevation as well. So we're going to go into some more detail on each of these 4 things and what you're going to do. And the first one is soil. And because it's the most basic of everything that you're going to do. And I'll tell you right now, if you don't take the time to do something with your soil, you will not have a successful vegetable garden here. You just won't. So you have to do something. So what are you going to do? What's the number 1 thing you're going to do? What's most important of all? No matter where you live, no matter what part of town or what part of the county surrounding the city, what are you going to do to soil, no matter what kind of soil is there? Yes, ma'am.
Amend the soil.
With what?
The
How?
environment.
You're going to add organic material to the soil because all of our soils are very, very poor in organic content. So you're going to have to add organic material, period. What are some examples of organic material? What's the best one if you have it?
Compost.
Compost is number 1. What are other really good ones though?
Leaves, dry leaves.
Leaves, exactly. Manures,
Manure.
not pine needles. Okay. So, any of that, you got to add, or you just have to add organic material. So why do you do that? What's it going to do for your soil? Obviously, it's going to improve it, but what's it going to improve? What things is it going to improve?
The nutrients for the plants.
The nutrients for the plants. What else? The actual physical structure of the soil, meaning the clay, silt, and sand, which are the 3 textures of soil. Doesn't matter if you have a very heavy clay soil or if you have a very loose sandy soil, depending on where you live. By adding the organic material, it's going to improve it. It'll help break up a heavy clay soil. It'll help bind up a sandy soil. So no matter what you do, adding the organic material is going to improve the physical makeup of the soil, which also improves the water holding capacity, the oxygen content, everything that goes along with it. It adds nutrients itself, as I said. And what are the nutrients that you're adding? What's on a fertilizer bag? 3 numbers. What does that mean?
Nitrogen, potassium, and.
You got, first one's nitrogen, second one is phosphorus,
Phosphorus, yes.
third one is potassium. So all fertilizers or even organic amendments, everything, that's called an NPK analysis. Everything has an NPK analysis. The human body has an NPK analysis. Everything does. Everything that's living has that. So first one's nitrogen. What does that do for the plants? Basically on a very elementary level. What are the plants getting from the nitrogen? That's improving the green part of the plants, the leaves, basically. So anything that's green. What about phosphorus? What's that doing? That's the middle number. That's for flowers and that's for the flowers and fruit part of the plant. And the third one, potassium, is for the root structure. So it's important on the proportions of those for a vegetable garden, because if you're putting in the wrong thing, you're going to not have success with your vegetable garden either. What's the ideal ratio of those 3 numbers for a vegetable garden? Anybody want to take a
Yes,
crack at that one?
2.5. Mm,
Mainly balanced, meaning they're all about the same. And 10-10-10 is the traditional one that's recommended for a vegetable garden. That's a chemical fertilizer, but you can do it organically if that's what you choose to do. And if you're doing it organically, if you want to add extra nitrogen, the material that you add is something called blood meal. If you're doing phosphorus, you want to add more phosphorus. The organic way is to add bone meal. And if you want to add potassium, the organic method is a material called green sand. All of those are available at the nurseries. Chances are you don't have to add potassium because our soils are not deficient in potassium. But if you add too much nitrogen, then you have beautiful, like for your tomato plants, you have beautiful green plants that don't bloom or they don't set fruit because there's not enough phosphorus, there's too much nitrogen.
mhm.
There's a fertilizer available that's called 30-00, meaning it's all nitrogen. What's that for? That is for a specific purpose. It's for a lawn, it's for growing grass. It's not for your vegetable garden. Don't use that. So pay attention, okay? So it's gonna add nutrients by adding the organic material. It's also going to improve the pH of the soil or the acidity, alkalinity of your soil. So it does all of that. So how much organic material are you going to add? How much you're going to put in there? Height or in inches? 1 to 2 inches is what's recommended per year. What's the ideal time to do that? If you have a choice, what time of the year? It's not spring, it's fall.
Okay.
If you're starting a vegetable garden now in a new place, put it in now anyway, but you get a bigger benefit if you add it in the fall because it's composting throughout the winter and improving your soil during the winter months. And when do you stop doing that? When do you stop adding the organic material? After how many years can you quit? Anybody want to guess? You don't ever quit. Somehow that stuff all disappears. I don't know where it goes, but it goes away. So you don't stop. So that's all of the stuff about adding the organic material. I know I've pounded a lot into your heads, but it's so important. You really do need to do it if you want to be successful. You want to balance the pH of the soil a little bit. pH is the acidity, alkalinity of the soil. Goes on a scale of 1 to 14, with 7 being neutral. 7's in the middle of the scale. As numbers go down from 7, it gets exponentially more acidic from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4. As the numbers go up from 7, it gets exponentially more alkaline, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, up to 14. Where on that scale is perfect for a vegetable garden? What are you aiming for? What number? 7. Actually, you're aiming for neutral. Where is the natural soil here on that scale? Is it at 7? Is it lower? Is it higher?
Higher.
It's higher. And depending on where you are, it might be a whole lot higher. If you're out in the Winona area where you're on limestone soil, the pH is real high. Donny Park, it tends to be real high. Some parts of the city, not so much, like in the old part of town, west of downtown, that's heavy clay soil. It's not as alkaline in that area, so it depends. So you're going to want to try to acidify the soil. Never here are you going to add lime, which is going to make your soil more alkaline, never ever. Always you're going to want to try to acidify it by adding soil sulfur.
How do you know when a plant has too much acid?
You can test it. You can send it into a lab to test it, or you can get real simple soil testers at the garden centers
Mhm.
that you can test it. But I never bother because you know it's going to be between 7, 7.5,
Mhm.
maybe as high as 8, but you're going to need to acidify it. Just do it. And don't worry about how much.
Okay.
So you're going to add sulfur. It's also just known as, the bag may say soil acidifier. And what's the right time of the year to do that? Spring. Everybody's confused now. Spring, okay? Again, we talked about the nutrients, even though adding the organic material is going to Add some nutrients. You're gonna probably want to add some more, particularly if it's a new area. Add some more fertilizer of some sort. And when's the ideal time to do that? Also spring. And again, middle of summer. So you're gonna do it twice. Okay. So other thing you want to do is in the fall, you're going to want to clean your garden up as you're getting toward the end of the season. Any of the plants that were kind of diseased or didn't look very good, you want to get them out of there. And then you start anything. So what that brings us to is this little chart, which is kind of your calendar on working with your soil. And kind of think of your soil as like one of your pets, like your dog or your cat. You just need to take care of it all the time. And there's the calendar on when you're going to do it. You know, we're right here, winter moving, hopefully moving on to spring. So as we're moving into spring, that's when we're going to add our fertilizer or sulfur. We may want to work up the soil to make the soil plantable. And then we're going to be planting as we're moving spring into summer. Midsummer, we're going to add more nutrients at that time. And as we're moving into fall and harvest time, we're going to harvest. After we're finished harvesting, we're going to clean everything up, get the junky stuff out of there. If there were plants at the end of the season that were still healthy, that are finished, you can work those back into the soil as part of your organic material that you're going to add. But don't, anything that's insected infested or looks like it's diseased, do not add that back in the soil, put it in the trash. Just get it out of there. Then we're going to add our compost and all of our other organic materials. And I like to work that stuff into the soil in the fall because it tends to break down better if it's worked into the soil rather than just sitting on top. And then here we are back where we started. And now we're going to do it again. And we're going to just keep doing that every year, year after year. And it seems like a lot of trouble. However, you'll be surprised at how good a garden you'll have if you do this kind of thing. Does anybody have any questions on that?
When in summer is your second fertilizer?
Mid-July,
Mid-July.
right in the center of the summer. Yes.
I've never added sulfur to my garden. Do you just buy like sulfur?
You just buy and it'll say, it'll either say soil acidifier or it'll say garden sulfur. And it'll say on the package how much per square. Basically, I just throw some on there. That's how scientific. Just put some on there. And I just throw it on there, you know, a couple of weeks before I start planting stuff usually. So it has time to kind of work into the soil. So what about microclimates? You know, I touched on that. You're going to be dealing with different levels of microclimates. You have the overall climate zone that we have here. That you can't change. Flagstaff is USDA 6A now, which has changed. We used to be a 5B. Now we've gotten a little bit warmer. Then you have neighborhood microclimates. It's very different in different parts of town. As you go out Fort Valley Road, it gets colder, colder, colder till you get out to Baderville, which has a 30-day growing season. 30 days. And the banana belt is at the base of Mount Eldon, like straight up 4th Street. We're in part of it right here, but it gets warmer and warmer as you go up towards the base of Mount Eldon, and that wraps around the east side toward the mall and Highway 89. That's the banana belt, and the closer you are to the base of Mount Eldon, the warmer at night you're going to be. You're no different during the day. It's the nighttime temperatures that are warmer because Mount Eldon itself acts as a big heat sink during the day. It absorbs heat, radiates it back to the whole neighborhood at night. Plus, cold air at night flows downhill, just like water flows downhill, flows off of that slope and pools in the low spots. I lived in a warm spot, in a low spot in Doney Park at the bottom. So I was actually colder at night than the city, even though I was much hotter during the day. So, you know, all of that's going to factor in what you're doing. Then as you come into your own property, different microclimates there, and then your garden area is going to have different microclimates within it. Just be aware of them. And why does it matter? It matters because we have warm weather vegetables, we have cool weather vegetables. The cool weather vegetables like to grow in cooler weather. They can handle some shade. It's okay for some shade. They can and they should be planted fairly early. You don't have to wait till middle of June. In fact, you shouldn't wait until the middle of June to plant those because they're not severely damaged down to about 25 degrees. They're still okay. Okay. What are they? What are the cool ones?
lettuces.
The whole family of leafy stuff, you know, like lettuce, spinach, chard, and all of that. What else? There are a lot of them.
Chives.
Pardon me?
My chives do well.
Chives, yeah, we'll call that an herb, but that's part of the onion family. So the entire onion family, onion, garlic, chives, shallots, garlic, all of that. Root crops such as radishes, beets, carrots, all of that stuff. The entire cabbage family, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, turnips, you know, all of that stuff. Peas, garden peas, garbanzo beans, lentils, fava beans, that whole thing. The whole onion family I already mentioned, and celery is the other one. All of those are cool weather vegetables that like the cooler weather. They grow better in cooler weather. Consequently, all of them like it here in Flagstaff. So all of that stuff is pretty easy to grow. So that's a lot of stuff right there. The more difficult ones we have to deal with are the warm weather vegetables because they like to grow in warmer weather. They have to be in the full sun to thrive. They have to be planted late because even a light frost is going to kill them and going to kill them gone and dead, and you start over. So what are those vegetables? Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, melons, beans. Even though beans and peas are closely related, beans are warm weather, peas are cool weather. All the squashes, you know, all that like zucchini and other summer squash, pumpkins, all of that, melons, cantaloupe, cucumbers, and sweet potatoes is probably the last one. Then we have a couple of oddballs that don't quite fit into the categories. One of them is corn. Corn is a warm weather crop. However, it's also grass and it can handle some frost. So I like to plant corn not quite as early as the early stuff, but not as late as the late stuff. So I generally plant corn here middle of May. Whereas the early stuff I plant around the first week of May and the late stuff more around early June. So the corn, it can handle some frost and it's okay. It even might knock it down, it comes right back. And the other one that's kind of an oddball is potatoes. It's basically a cool weather crop. However, it cannot handle frost at all. The leaves will fry and be burned completely with even a light frost. They'll probably be okay and come back. I've had them not come back when we've had a hard freeze. So I plant them early, but I cover them at night as well.
What about herbs?
Herbs, I'm not going to get into tonight because we could have an entire class, but it's the same concept. There are warm weather herbs, there are cool weather herbs, and there are perennial herbs, and there are perennial vegetables. Can anybody think of some perennial vegetables that might grow well here? There are 4 of them. Asparagus is probably the main one, yes. Horseradish is another one. Rhubarb, yes, and there's one more. And that's Jerusalem artichoke, not globe artichoke, which is what artichokes, but Jerusalem artichoke is also called sunchoke. And it's part of the sunflower family, and it creates an edible tuber, like a potato, and that's what you eat, it's a potato, but the plant looks and blooms like a sunflower. They're gorgeous, they're perennial, they come back every year, from year to year. And they're very highly digestible. People with diabetes, it's recommended that you eat Jerusalem artichokes in place of potatoes. You use them exactly the same way, but has to do with insulin tolerance and things like that. They're much better than potatoes. So,
Question from the previous subject, why do people have gypsum for those?
gypsum is used mostly in the southern desert in Arizona to break up caliche. We generally don't have to do that here. It's calcium carbonate is what it is, and it tends to just break up a soil that you would have to use a pickaxe on in order to make it plantable. Did you have any other questions through Zoom?
That's the only one.
That's all right now. Okay. So everybody got this concept down. That's concept number 2. And really closely related to concept number 2 is concept number 3, which is timing. It's just a matter of common sense, you know. Figure out a calendar that's going to work for you, and that's a very good calendar for the Flagstaff area. Again, you'll get copies of all of these slides,
Mhm.
but that just tells you like, when you can start some of those as seeds, when you want to transplant them, when you're going to be harvesting. It's just a very good reference kind of a chart. It's common sense, plant stuff at the appropriate time. Where I grew up in Ohio, the climate was so incredibly different there from here. Once it was done freezing, that was it. I mean, we didn't get this weird stuff in the spring like snowstorms in June. We were finished with frost easily by late April. So May 1st, everybody went and planted their gardens, the whole thing. And you were fine. That's what worked. Here, no, that's not going to work. People would often ask me, well, when do you plant your garden? Do you plant it in April? Yeah. May? Yeah. June? Yeah. I mean, you're on a sequence rather than just a simple single
Yeah.
day. So get the concept of timing. This throws people off, especially our crazy spring weather. I had somebody complain to me one time. They planted their beans 3 different times and they just quit. They weren't ever going to try it again. I said, well, when did you plant them first? First of April. Oh, okay. When did you, and then what happened? They froze. When did you try it again? 1st of May. What happened? They froze. When did you do it again? Middle of May. What happened? They froze. So you quit? Did you try the 1st of June? No, I quit. Well, try the 1st of June next time and forget the other days. So just, think about timing. But some things you can plant right now. You can plant spinach now. You can plant lettuce now. You can plant onions now. It's March. It's late March. And yeah, it's going to snow on them. All that. Peas you can plant now. It's great. Some of the things you can plant in the fall as seeds, this early stuff like onions, lettuce, spinach, and they'll come up when they know it's time to come up, and they'll be coming up now in your garden. So think about that as well. So timing. And last of all, the other main concept is varieties. Again, it's a matter of common sense. Try to use seed sources that are from high elevation, dry climate areas, short season areas. Don't grow stuff that takes more days than what you have. These 2 sources are ones that I particularly like. I have the catalogs up here that you're welcome to look at after class if you would like. Pine Tree Garden Seeds is my #1 go-to always from year to year to year to year. For seeds, that's a company that's in Maine. They grow a lot of their own seeds that they sell. Everything that they have is for short season areas. I've never had a crop failure with anything out of that catalog, and that's the only one I can say that for. Yes. Knock on wood.
Yes.
So I highly recommend that. The other good thing is they sell small quantity packets of things. So if you just want to try a little bit of something, you can get a mini packet of something, and they have the best prices also. Their prices are more reasonably. Seed prices have gone off the charts since pandemic. They're very expensive. Pine Tree is still pretty reasonable. And you can order online from their website. Johnny's Selected Seeds is the other one that I've got up there. Again, I've got their catalog here as well. That's another company that's also in Maine. Again, all of their items are appropriate for short seasons. I've had very good luck with everything. A lot of Flagstaff people use Johnny's Selected Seeds and like that one. It tends to be a little more pricey than Pine Tree. But the thing I like about the Johnny's catalog is for everything that's in there. And by the way, both of these catalogs have other things besides vegetables. They have flowers and live plants and all kinds of stuff. But the Johnny's catalog has horticultural information for each of the vegetables and each of the varieties. Like it'll say, plant this early May, how many days it needs, how much sun it needs. It's the only seed catalog I found where the horticultural information is correct for Flagstaff. So you can do what they say and you're going to do fine. None of the other catalogs that I've ever seen have that kind of information in it. So that's a good seed catalog to use just for reference, even if you don't buy anything from them. So it's a good one to consider. But there are other ones that are really good. Stokes is another one. That's from Buffalo, New York. They have very good cool weather and short season varieties. Territorial Seeds from Oregon is another really excellent one. There's one called Vermont Seed Company out of Vermont that has all different kinds of vegetables, all for short season. Works really well. What would be some reasons for growing things from seed? And one of the people in the audience has already mentioned this before class started, of trying to start a lot of things from seeds rather than buying plants. Like starting tomatoes from seeds or starting peppers from seeds, starting cabbage from seeds, things that you would normally buy the plants for. What would maybe be some reasons you might want to do that? It can be way cheaper, but you'll have some initial investment for equipment. Okay, but yeah, it can be cheaper and it's fun. It gives you something you can be doing that's garden related now, or even earlier than now, when you really got the itch to be doing some gardening, but it's too cold, you can't do anything outside, and you can things you can start doing inside. Plus, it exponentially increases your palette of varieties that you can grow tenfold easily. There's a catalog here that's Tomato Growers Supply that has close to 300 varieties of tomatoes in it. Are you going to find 300 varieties of tomato plants out there in the nurseries? Probably not. Although our locally owned nurseries, Warners and Violas, are very good, at having varieties that are appropriate for this area. But and they'll have sometimes as many as 50 varieties, but there still may be more than those than what they have that you may want to try. But the key to growing your plants from seed inside is the very same 4 things that I've already talked about. You've got to create the appropriate soil. You have to have containers to hold this soil. The soil needs to be a seed starting soil specifically, not a standard potting soil, and certainly not garden soil that you haul in from outside. You need to use seed starting soil, and the bags will be labeled seed starting soil. It's important to use that. They've got to have the right microclimate. They have to be at the right temperature for germination. So you may need to think about how you're going to do that. They think about your timing. How are you going to figure out your timing? When are you going to do this? You got to figure out, number one, what you're going to plant. When are you going to put that plant outside in your garden? What day? How many days is it going to take to get to or how many weeks to a 6-inch tall plant? And then back up on your calendar that amount of weeks, and that's when you're going to start it. And it's not going to be the same for everything. It's going to depend on when it is. So that's what you have to figure out. And again, varieties, same thing, varieties, use appropriate. Varieties are going to be appropriate over the long term of the season. But all of those factors are important. You need to think about what's the number one factor, though, for starting stuff inside. What's most important of all? One thing is most important that I haven't mentioned. What is it?
Motivation.
One thing, one word. Light. Okay. Your goal is to get a healthy plant of an appropriate size to transplant. What consists of a healthy plant? It's going to be 6 inches tall, roughly, when you're going to transplant it. But it needs to be short and fat, basically, not tall and skinny. Okay, tall and skinny or tall and spindly is not a healthy plant to transplant. Squat, short and fat, thick stem, usually wider than it is tall, 6 inches tall. Think short and fat. That's what's good. How are you gonna get the plant that's short and fat instead of one that's tall and skinny? You're gonna do that by controlling your light. A window is not going to be good enough. You have to provide some artificial light, and that artificial light has to be movable. Okay, so just a bank of fluorescent lights is what's appropriate. They don't have to be special grow lights, special grow tubes. Plain old fluorescent types are just as good. But the key is, where's that light located in association with the plants? It needs to be no more than 1 to 2 inches away from the plants at all times from day one. So when you're starting those seed plants, that bank of lights, so here's my flat, the bank of lights needs to be right there. And then as the plants germinate, as they come up, you very gradually just keep moving that bank of lights up as the plant grows. What that does is that keeps the growth at that certain, at a certain, I want to say, keeps it growing at a constant rate. If you have your plant seed flats here and you've got your light up here, what's going to happen? That light, that plant's going to go like that. You're going to have a tall, skinny plant that's not going to be healthy, and it's probably going to die when you transplant it. Okay, so take that into consideration. Well, I know you have some specific questions about that procedure, so that's what you do. Also, if you're starting some stuff from seed, and even when you're buying plants at a nursery to be transplanted, you need to harden them off before you actually transplant them. And what does that mean? What am I talking about? Anybody know what that means?
Get them used to the outside climate.
Exactly. You want to acclimate them gradually to the outside climate. Because if you grew them yourself, they were in an inside in a really agreeable microclimate. You put them outside, all of a sudden they're in the real world and they may not like it. Okay. You have to gradually acclimate them to that. Even when you're buying plants at the nursery, you don't know if that just came off the truck from California or Florida or somewhere from a whole different climate than ours. You transplant it, you may not have a great transplanting success rate if you just plant it without hardening them off. So I always harden them off, even if I bought them at the nursery or if I start them themselves. And what that means is you put it outside still in its container for just maybe a few hours the first day and then take it back in. Put it out a little bit longer the next day, take it back in, out a little bit longer the next day. And you should do that for up to about 5 days at least. And then the last day or two, when I feel it's getting pretty hardened off, I'll set them out where I'm going to plant them and just leave them sitting there still in their containers for another day or two, just to really make sure they're acclimated to the environment and then transplant them at that point. And your success rate in transplanting is going to be much, much, much greater if you do that. So any questions? Yes, sir.
Do packets of seeds have a typical expiration date?
They will say on the seed packet, best by whatever year. And it is, you do have the best germination rate if you do it that year. However, if you store them in a cool, dry place, you can keep most seeds from year to year for at least several years. And that's easy to do in our climate, in our dry climate, to do that. You should not store them in plastic bags. It's better to store them in paper bags or envelopes because the seeds actually need to breathe. And they will suffocate if they're kept in plastic. So it's recommended that you do not keep them in plastic bags if you're saving them from year to year. Yes, ma'am.
Can you feel with the heating pads?
Heat mats, I always use heat mats. And what that's talking about is like a little heating pad that's specific. It's called a heating mat that you put under your seed flat when you're starting something inside, and you can control that temperature to make a little warmer micro environment, a microclimate to get germination, because most seeds need to be around 70 to 75 degrees at germination time in order to germinate. So exceptions to that are spinach seeds that actually like to be cold and germinate better in cold soil rather than in warm soil. It's one reason why you can plant the spinach outside so very, very early. So anyway, all of these catalogs, if you want to look at them before you leave, they're all sitting up here. So in conclusion, here's some words of wisdom for the day. A garden is half made when it's well planned, meaning the importance of this class today. The best gardener is the one who does the most gardening by the winter fire. That's by Liberty Hyde Bailey, who was a very famous horticulturalist at Cornell University way back in the 1880s and 90s, going in the 1900s. He was very cutting edge in organic gardening when it was not a popular thing to do. So just open it up for general questions at this point on anything I may not have covered or anything that you might be interested in that we may not have covered. One more thing I do want to mention, and some of you that are here in person already know, I currently live in Clarkdale, Arizona, which is an hour and 15 minutes south of here in the Verde Valley. Clarkdale is right beside Cottonwood. We have an annual plant sale and garden festival once a year. This year it's April 20th. Our garden festival is the first one in Northern Arizona every year. So you can get a jump on gardening, you can get some plants, and most of our plants would be appropriate for up here. We have all kinds of vegetables, we have flowers, we have landscaping plants, we have all sorts of stuff. Our prices are very reasonable. Everything that we have is grown by volunteers and contributed by volunteers. We dig stuff out of our yards. We start stuff by seeds inside. We propagate from year to year. We've got close to 30 volunteers that are all growing stuff for this plant sale right now. We have about 2,000 plants collected at this point that are going to be for sale. Our plants are very reasonably priced. They were cheaper than any nursery. We also have hundreds of packets of free seeds that are free for the taking, as many as you want. We have garden-related art vendors that are going to be there selling their products. That's all garden-related stuff. We have beautiful handmade stepping stones. We have handmade bird baths. We have chip wind chimes, all kinds of very interesting artwork. We also have information tables. The Master Gardener Associations of both Coconino County and Yavapai County will be there answering people's questions and giving out information about the Master Gardener program. Friends of the Verde River is going to be there talking about ecological uses of your garden plants. The International Hummingbird Society is going to be there. Gardens for Humanity is going to be there, which is another ecological gardening organization. We're going to have 3 garden speakers, and everything is free as far as, you don't have to pay for admission or to attend the lectures or anything. So there are some flyers up here if you don't take them. So come see us if you can do it. That's a Saturday on April 20th. So getting back to your question, sorry for the plug there, but I had to do it. I had to do it.
Got one from Zoom.
Okay.
Do you have recommendations for dealing with prairie dogs and similar pests?
Oh, gee.
For example, in Donny Park.
Yikes. Prairie dogs are a tough one. That's a touchy subject too. Gophers, kind of smaller, kind of like small prairie dogs, but they do significant damage as well. As far as gophers do, I have always trapped them. That's what has worked for me. And prairie dogs also, you can trap them and move them. I wouldn't recommend shooting them. It's not a good idea to do that, but try to relocate them if you can. I was lucky in where I was, I did not have prairie dogs, but I had thousands of gophers. And I had them wipe out an entire row of potatoes in one day or one night. They were there one day and they were gone the next day. And I didn't realize soon enough that what was going on. But I also had elk eating my garden. I had horses got in there and ate my garden. I had neighbors' goats get in there and eat my garden. So I don't know. It's a tough, but just be aware that they will destroy your garden. So, yes, sir.
For what it's worth, I've had great success with the little things you stick into the ground that send out the little electrical impulses. So
Has that worked for you?
I've
Good.
had, like the next day, they stopped attacking my garden.
Good.
Yeah.
Good to know.
With prairie dogs, yeah.
Good to know. I think somewhat that depends on what kind of soil you have too, how well it transmits the.
Perhaps this was in the banana belt.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, those are available from a lot of different resources. You can get them online from. Yeah, and I don't know exactly what they're called, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But this little hardware store, Danny? They sell it.
Question back there?
Question I
No,
have,
go ahead.
Is it possible to grow any of these vegetables in large flower pots?
Yes, That's another whole topic. One of our lectures at our garden festival is on container gardening, on exactly how to do that. Yeah, you can grow lots and lots and lots of stuff in containers. About the only thing I would not try is corn because you just need a bigger space for that. Tomatoes grow extraordinarily well in pots. Most everything you can grow in containers, and particularly if you're really limited for space, containers can be the way to go. You can grow a whole garden on a balcony or on a deck in containers. It works really, really well. So yes,
We have a lot of squirrels where I am, so we use the mesh, like the little square mesh. But I wonder, does that impact pollinators? Because sometimes I notice I'm not getting as, I'll have tons of flowers, but not as much of the fruit.
what kind of mesh do you use?
It's like the green like square, but it
Okay.
has to be rather small because it's not too small. It's probably like a half inch.
Okay,
Because the squirrels will get in there and they'll
Right.
eat anything.
I have had that issue as well, and I use chicken wire actually, and just bend, put like a dome of chicken wire,
Okay.
and that keeps the
And then you
squirrels
kinda
out.
bury it in there,
Yeah.
Because then I try to get in and prune and it's like.
Well, just pull it out when you have to do that, but, affix it however you can, but that's the chicken wire, the openings are small enough to keep the squirrels out, but they're big enough to allow bees and other pollinators to get in. That's what's worked for me.
And to encourage the pollinators, I try to plant flowers around. Is there a flower that you recommend?
That gets to be a real complicated topic. Well, there's a whole class just on pollinators, but marigolds are the most common thing that's used. Not only does it bring pollinators in, it tends to keep pests away. Yeah. More questions? Online questions?
Just an additional comment that prairie dogs west of town carry the plague, so do not handle them yourselves.
Good advice. No, it really, seriously, that is a question. What else? It's about time to wrap up. So anything else on anybody's mind? If not, feel free to look. Yes, one more question.
Okay. We had family members that, young kids that wanted to learn how to plant.
Mhm.
So I decided to make them plant pumpkin seeds in the end of October, or beginning of November. And then my pumpkins are like this high in their container
Mhm.
in my house. And is it a good time to plant them outside now? Or
Nope.
do I need
Nope.
to keep on babysitting?
You're gonna
them?
have to keep babysitting another 2 months. You can put them in bigger and bigger containers before you put them out. If you put them out, you're gonna have to bring them in at night at least until June.
Until June?
Mhm. Or put them out with protection, put them out in walls of water, or put them out with covers over them. Anyway, feel free to look at the catalogs if you like, take a flyer on the plant sale if you're interested. And thank you very much.